Please join me in welcoming Mr. John Pasmore, CEO and founder of Latimer, and Mr. Chuck Faush of Miles College. They're going to be speaking on equitability. This is when I know I'm having a tough day in the middle of this day. Equitability, inclusiveness, and bias in generative AI. Please proceed.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. There it is. Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. I think first shout outs are in order to say thank you to Morgan State and this amazing group of folks who I heard all morning long have been changing, making moves, and keeping us all accountable and responsible. So I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm a communicator who served in public and private sector and just making a transition from corporate to education. So I am, as I mentioned a second ago, I am on a listening and learning tour and just really happy to be anywhere in the kingdom where I can understand and learn a little bit more. And I am really thrilled to be with my good friend, John Pasmore, who, well, let me just start with this. Before we hear about Latimer, we need to hear about Pasmore. And I'm going to start with this.
All right.
Why in the world did you call me at the crack of dawn this morning? Is it because your mind, your brilliant mind never turns off, or you just, don't answer that. Don't answer that. Don't answer that. I do want to ask you this. Tell us a little bit about Pasmore before you tell us about Latimer, and then talk about the intersection of the two.
Okay. Thank you, Chuck. Chuck and I go back a couple of years, which may be apparent in the dialogue here. But I've been in the media business for quite a while, and I really look at my start in technology goes back to 2008 when I launched my first venture-backed business, which was called Voyage TV, which was like an Expedia with video. And we went out and we raised $10 million for that business. And sold it 5 years later, but I was considered at that point a non-technical founder, and that generally wasn't a good thing to be when you're out talking to VCs. They took it on the chin and they moved forward. But at that time, I went back to Columbia University to get a degree in computer science, which took many years going part-time. And then did a deeper dive into technology, and as that translates into Latimer, our professors, the professors that I learned from at Columbia University, would all agree, I would say 4 years ago, that computers weren't really very close to being able to write code because there was a reasoning ability that computers simply didn't have. So when ChatGPT launched, I was amazed because I had learned that it was decades away before computers would have that kind of capability. And I think the next thing that we all saw was that these new technologies, these generative technologies from OpenAI and even Google and others were making mistakes, and particularly they were making mistakes about Black and brown people. They were sometimes insulting people with bias, and then sometimes they're just inaccurate. But coming from a technical perspective, I thought that was a solvable issue. And last summer, we started this company, FutureSum and Latimer, with the idea that, hey, I think we can go out and solve some of these problems. And we have Malor, who's our CTO here, and we launched Latimer, which is what I would call an inclusive large language model, January 22nd. So let's say from July to January, we worked really hard and got the business up and running.
I'm gonna take some privilege and take you guys back, because John is being very, very modest. And since you brought up years,
yes,
you have a little more gray than I. Maybe not. The context that you would be helpful for you to know is that before this phase, this chapter, is that John was a very well-respected media guy who changed things, moved things, and ran, I believe, one of the largest Black-owned media companies in the country and the world. And the way I met John was, I picture this, I was in television, and I was trying to make it to national television. And I walked in with, boy, I'm about to date myself. Does anybody know what a VHS is? I'm just thinking, okay, all right, I want to make sure I'm in the right crowd. So I walk in with this VHS, and he doesn't watch a thing, but he looks at my business plan and tells me how wrong I am, and begins to write it on the day that we meet, our first meet and greet. And so this is the guy who can look at something and make it something else. You ever met anybody like that? And the next thing I know, that he's got me on a plane to LA, and I took my VHS.
Of course.
And it actually worked. And so he's launched things, launched careers. And I want to add that context, because here we are now in this amazing space. And now that I'm transitioning and I want to learn everything that Morgan State is doing, where do you see the intersection of education and what you are doing now?
Yeah, well, I mean, with AI and you know, large language models, I think, are at the basis of a lot of different industries. You know, whether it's education or healthcare. You know, it's going to kind of impact just about everything, I think, is our opinion, that you know, AI is, you know, whether you want to call it a tsunami or a tidal wave, it's going to impact a lot of things. It's going to impact, a lot of those are very positive. You know, I think we've heard today some very positive impacts in terms of healthcare, in terms of nursing and giving people more insights. But it can also be very disruptive, as we saw with OpenAI. They kind of jumped the gun a little bit. There's no regulation, there was no legislation to say, you know, what these things could or could not do, and how people could interact with it. So, and we know that it's going to cause some job displacement, let's say, if not just losses. So, and we don't know, you know, they're kind of brand new, so we don't know exactly what those are. With education, it has tremendous impact. You know, imagine if you could essentially walk around with, you know, Albert Einstein in your laptop. You know, it can answer any question as long as it's not hallucinating. And I think that's also a technical issue that will be resolved. But and they're conversational, so you don't have to really think that deeply about what you want it to say back to you. You could just have a conversation with Latimer, with OpenAI, with Gemini from Google, and you can learn whatever you want to know. At this point, I think OpenAI has said that their model has read every single word that it can reach on the internet. So imagine if a person could read the whole internet and recall it in, you know, a millisecond. That's amazing.
So Forbes described you and described Latimer as a Black GPT. Talk about where'd you get the name Latimer? I think I know, right. But where'd you get it from? And why was it important to brand? And let me add some more context. For a storyteller, it's all about setting not only the moment, but the movement. And so when you think now and think later, why Latimer? Why that brand? And what happens in the landscape when someone begins to understand the power of Latimer?
Yeah, well, that's a packed question there, Chuck. So why Latimer? You know, Well, let's go back to it's a black GPT. So, that was kind of the first thing that stuck with me, is that in, last summer, last fall, a lot of people were essentially asking Google or asking OpenAI to correct things. And I didn't think that for black people in particular, that we wanted to have a repository of our history where it was kind of beyond our control. Like is that going to be the forever thing, that we're asking Google or Meta to correct something that's factually inaccurate? I didn't think that was, a great setup. So that's the fundamental basis of what Latimer is. We created a factual repository of data that sits on top of another model, and we can constantly train up our model. It's called a RAG model, but we can constantly add new data to our side of it. And we work with a lot of colleges. We're working with Morgan State. And, in that sense, we have a couple of unique data sources. We've partnered with the New York Amsterdam News, which is the second oldest black newspaper in the United States. We've partnered, I call him our content czar. That would be Professor Asante at Temple University, who created the first African-American PhD studies program here in the US. And, we really want to bring essentially the perspective that he has in his courses to Latimer, so that it's kind of forever embodies this perspective of African-American history and culture in an accurate and factual way, so that if there's a governor in Florida or a governor in Texas that says, hey, we can't have this book or take these books out of the library, or we're not going to teach that we have something that sits out of reach of all of that.
What is out of reach? Anything?
Well, I mean, out of reach of local politicians. We want to be a global factual resource and a learning resource.
And Lewis Latimer, right?
Lewis Latimer, yes. And we work with a lot of young people. We work or intend to work. We give the product away really for free to HBCUs to use. So the students wouldn't have to pay for it. And we want students to think about, hey, we all know that, rappers make a lot of money. It looks like a really, wonderful lifestyle, that we have wonderful athletes like LeBron James, and those, certainly warrant emulating that. But we have black geniuses as well that we don't talk about that much. Or in some cases, like Lewis Latimer, that have somehow been a little bit erased from history, and their contributions are amazing. And in some cases, more amazing than even our wonderful, athletic and entertainment stars. So we have to, we want for bright young people to see that light, that, hey, I don't have to go play basketball. I don't have to, be an entertainer. I can use my head and make a lot of money, be very influential, and there's a wonderful future there.
So talk about Latimer's future and intersections for a minute. Let me set you up. So I was on a call with about 100 professors talking about this very subject, and Latimer was introduced. And just as we heard in the previous panel about being responsible, about the scale and responsibility sort of run in parallel tracks. Talk to us a little bit about the path forward with testing and equity and being responsible and knowing that word unfair is sort of a bow around all of that.
Yeah. Well, certainly, bias has been a word that is, we've heard it a lot since large language models have launched, and there is, so there's all kinds of biases. One of the, in our country, we have a bias, that's pro-Western civilization. I went to Columbia. One of the classes that you're supposed to take at some place like Columbia is the history of Western art. It's a required class. If you ask ChatGPT, who are the most influential artists in our culture, it's probably going to tell you, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Vincent van Gogh, Pablo Picasso, and it's not going to give you Indian artists or African artists or Chinese artists. It's going to kind of mirror that history of Western civilization. So that's a bias, and that's a bias that, perhaps those models will always have, but it's a bias that we would like to not have in Latimer. And then there are, other biases, depending on, from a technical standpoint. A lot of the bigger large language models got their base data by scraping the internet. So we all know in some corners of the internet are less desirable. And if you looked at the comments on Twitter or on YouTube and you suck those in as hey, I'm going to teach this model how to speak, it's going to learn things that maybe you wouldn't want it to learn. So then you end up, in my opinion, you have guardrails, I guess is what we've come up with. But that knowledge is still, those words are still in its neural network, its brain somewhere, and you can't really go back and erase them. We haven't figured out really how to do that. So, that's kind of an embedded bias that we want to avoid in Latimer wherever possible. And it's something that I think, people in this room, you have young kids, you kind of want them to avoid it as well, if that answers your question.
It does. And before I go to questions from everybody else, as you walk out the door, what do you want us to remember? What do you want us to think about Latimer? What do you want us to remember? And well, let me add one more since I keep adding stuff, right? The last one is what do you want us to do?
I think, one of the things that we really wanted, especially young people at HBCUs, to think about is, hey, you don't have to be just a consumer or a user of a product. You can create something. And, starting in the summer and launching in January, very quickly, we were able to build something and launch it. And, that we can continually add features to it. We can continually add new tools. And I think young people, and we want to work with them. I was with the UNCF yesterday. We want to give them projects. So, hey, we're adding this feature. Maybe we have a hackathon and, you guys can help us build it, so that we can feel like this is ours. It's not something that Google just dropped on our heads and we have to use the Google or OpenAI. It's not that way at all. I mean, what has done in some cases, now that the thing can kind of code, is that, hey, if somebody has an idea and it requires some code, you can just tell it, hey, I need an application that does this, and it can start writing your code for you. So that code hurdle that maybe kept a lot of Black and brown people out of this technological lane, is going away.
So you may have heard a slight amen from the corner over here. I think that came from somebody who I know personally has molded thousands of young minds and now has an amazing effort that we're really happy to be a part of with the Propel Center. So I do not want to put you on the spot, but Lisa Herring, thank you for all the work that you have done. And I just felt like that there was I got the yay from you when John was talking about what it does and what it can do and what it will mean and as an impact, not just for a moment, but for a movement. Any questions from anybody? Oh, I'm surprised. Well.
So thank you, Chuck, and thank you for being here. Thank you both. That was a great intro to my question, which you actually answered as I was forming it, but I still would like to share it because of just past work. So I've had the good fortune to serve as superintendent for urban school districts where coding is still working its way into the curriculum, but especially when I think about the disparities for Black and brown students in public education and what we have the capacity to do. The statement of we need to be more than just consumers, but creators and co-creators on the front end is an imperative that I passionately and professionally believe in. So thank you for naming that. Yet there's still a door that we need to open to figure out how to make that happen with a sense of urgency. about a year ago, I asked that question to Sam Altman about where does the diversity efforts begin so that we're not just consumers, but creators. And almost a year later, we're still having this conversation. So I would welcome the further thought about where those opportunities exist. Yes, it's the K-12 pipeline, but it's also post-secondary, and it is especially within the HBCU ecosystem, that space where we're not just the consumer, but the creator, the co-creator, and starting very early. You also said something that I just wanted to highlight as well, which is the eclipse or the fading away of certain positions and jobs and titles and roles because of the influence and power of AI. And yet, I'm curious about when you think 5-10 years down the road as an entrepreneur, as a leader in this work, do you see then the emergence of new roles that are yet to be defined and named, and what you think that might look like? Or if that's in different areas or different disciplines, maybe it is in arts and entertainment.
Yeah.
Maybe it's more so in health innovation. Not sure, but would welcome your thoughts on that.
I think going forward, obviously, one of the things that these machines have a lot of issues with is just what we would call human creativity. So, that's something, that's an area that Black and brown people kind of excel in, and we have a lot of intellectual property in. So that's another issue, is that some of these large language models, let's say, hey, I'm making a song that sounds just like Biggie. It's like, well, did you pay for that? Did you, that's not a good thing. It might be kind of funny, but it's not good because we want to, we do own that intellectual property and should be paid for anybody that's exploiting it in some way. In terms of jobs, I think it's unclear. One thing that you mentioned Sam Altman, who's the CEO of OpenAI. One of the things I always think people should recognize is that while he is the CEO of OpenAI, he started another company called WorldCoin, which is a universal basic income company. So he went out before they've even launched, he had raised $100 million from mostly San Francisco venture capitalists. So raising $100 million is not easy. And the only use case for WorldCoin is if a lot of people get put out of work. It's $100 million. That means in order for them to get that back, it would have to be worth tens of billions of dollars. So Sam Altman, who probably has the best seat in the House in terms of what these technologies can do, is betting that, hey, my tech is going to put a lot of people out of work. And I have a better solution than the US government, who tried to send out checks during the pandemic, didn't work really well, so I've created a better solution. But it's a little, to me, that's a little scary.
Let me give him a little bit, another prop if I can. When he first started talking about Latimer, and we were in a corporate space, I was really inspired. I don't think I ever told you this.
No.
Okay. So I was really inspired because the first place that he wanted to start was with HBCUs. And it was to get truly embedded and to invest in. And I think he mentioned earlier, there's no fee. And so the idea of allowing HBCU students to not only experience, but to have a journey with it, I think is really, really important. So I want to give props to John for that. And I think there was one more question. Thank you, Dr. Herring.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay.
Yep.
First, thank you so much for sharing. This is really exciting. It's kind of an idea that I've heard other people float, creating this type of product, but you are really doing it and at a fast pace, so it's really cool. My name is Kweli Zukari. I work at Howard University. I'm Director of User Experience and Web Strategy. So we're doing some things with RAG models as well.
Yeah.
I first realized how biased the data sets were with LLMs when ChatGPT first came out. I asked it, what was the race of the ancient Egyptian people? Right, and this is a subject, ancient, if you know anything about Egyptology, it's a field of study that obviously they recognize how important that civilization was to the rest of the world and humanity and the development of knowledge, but it's always been kind of masked as not African.
Yeah.
But we had scholars in the 70s that went to the UN and proved without a shadow of a doubt using chemistry, Dr. Sheikh Diop and Dr. Theophil Obenga, who proved this is an African civilization. But yet the data set, if you ask it, it's still a very confusing answer. I don't know what they've done with that answer by this point, but
it doesn't want to answer that question.
It reflects the Western bias,
Yeah.
right? So this is still a big problem. So I think, and when you ask leaders, to your point, when you ask leaders that are in LLM development about these things, their answers is just band-aids, reinforcement learning, or, it doesn't get to the fundamental nature of like the actual data was the problem, so you need to start over with the data. But they're not going to do that, of course. So you are kind of, doing that. So I have two questions. One about the RAG model, you are still having to leverage a different LLM and then put your own much, much, much better data set on top of that. Do you have plans to take that even further and create your own LLM, which is a huge feat to be able to do, right? So like, I don't take that question lightly, but is that part of your plan? And number two, when you go to these entities and units like Temple, University, and go to the African American Studies Department, are there partnerships where they're like, well, we want to support you and we're going to help make sure you have the right data? Or is it also a relationship where you are compensating these different entities for using their data? Because that's been one of the biggest criticisms of these companies, that they're not compensating or recognizing anybody. In fact, they're making that all very opaque so that they don't have to recognize any of the sources of their data sets. So how are you addressing those two things?
All right, couple of things. Yeah, when we, even it's been amazing over the last 6 months, people's feelings about their data, which and it's valuable. So now you have folks like OpenAI or Google that maybe it hasn't been done yet, but they're responding to some of these lawsuits from authors and from newspapers by having closed door meetings. So maybe Google. A real example is OpenAI entered into a relationship with Le Monde, the newspaper in France, so that they can use that as data. And they've entered into a relationship with Business Insider. So one of the things I was with the Congressional Black Caucus a couple of weeks ago is, obviously these, multi-billion-dollar companies could pretty much lock up all the really valuable data in exclusives, which would then prevent any competitor from being able to train up a large language model, because at this point you need probably billions of words. And where are you going to get billions of words? Someplace like the New York Times that has a huge archive, that's an excellent place to start. So that's kind of a slippery slope. We do plan on creating training up our own foundation model. So Mistral, which is the French open source model, is something that we're looking at. Meta has Llama. We started working with them pretty early on that. It is on the roadmap, but it's kind of funny because the landscape changes every 2 or 3 weeks. Something new comes out, or there's some new competitive challenge. I think we're in a good place in some senses. For me, it's a bit of a advantage that, for, let's say, Meta, they're not focused on, Black people and Black content right at this moment. So I can have some of the conversations that we're having, even like the Amsterdam News, the second oldest Black newspaper in the United States. We have their data from 1926. You have the Chicago Defender. You have a bunch of other Black newspapers. And then you do actually have, we've had some conversations with Howard. And luckily, we do have this sense, I think, generally at HBCUs that, hey, we don't really want to give our libraries to Google. I mean, obviously, there's a potentially big check there, but we want to make sure that the community still has access to it. Happy to
Thanks
chat
so
now.
much. We're going to turn things over to Kofi Nyarko, who's going to read a few questions from the online participants.
Yes, we have a couple of questions in. The first is, this is really exciting. When will Latimer be open to the public?
Oh, it's open, latimer.ai, so you can sign up today.
Tell everybody to
get your phone, like right here, right now.
And just go to, it's www.latimer.ai. And you hit the sign up button, you're in.
All right.
Awesome.
The next one, excellent presentation. Any upcoming opportunities for social science PhD students and/or internships?
I think we just,
Yes.
we have a jobs at latimer.ai as an email address. So if somebody has a resume or a bio that they want to share, they can send it to jobs@latimer.ai. All right.
All right. I believe we don't have any more questions online. We have a few more minutes for questions here in the audience.
We could take maybe one more question, one more short question and short answer, because we need to get set up for the next session.
This might not be a super short question, but I think if we look back historically over this, like the past 75 years, we've used metrics to evaluate AI success by its ability to replicate humans, right? So in a sense, we're looking at AI success by human failure or replication. Do you have, I would say, thoughts on the metrics that we should be using going forward to mitigate some of the fear that has caused, and maybe its inaccuracy at this point?
Well, that might be a longer question and answer. We are, Malur, our CTO is here. We're working on a white paper in and around bias and measuring bias and how we want to evaluate that. So that white paper, I think we're just a couple of weeks away from publishing that. And he would probably be the best person to answer that question for you.
That is a good segue for the next session. We have one more question here.
Hey, Garrett Alzine here. Thanks for the session. Very informative, very interesting, Latimer, and what you're doing. So the question is, to what extent do you think that these companies like Google, OpenAI, and even Latimer potentially should be, as much as they are ingesting this data, they should also be committed to digitization of the data. So like, if you were to ask Google or OpenAI, like, are you a digitization company as well as an AI LLM type of company? Like, we have so many archival sets that are, all over and dispersed in different libraries and universities, and many of them are stored under stages or rotting away. And some of these data sets could be very valuable, especially to the effort to make them more fair and LLMs more fair and unbiased. And so do you feel like there's an obligation to, as much as they are so interested, the companies, in ingesting the information, they should be just as interested in ensuring that the already available data sets that are digitized become that?
Well, these are for-profit companies, and their obligation is really to their shareholders first and foremost. So I think that what you're asking them to do is be benevolent, which they may or may not. It's not necessarily in their DNA. So I would think that there's great organizations like HBCUs. So if you had documents, Howard or the Schomburg Library or others might be a better resource to make those kinds of efforts to digitize, essentially our history. Because once a private organization does the digitization, they're really not doing that out of the goodness of their heart. They're doing it because it's valuable to them. And then the question is, now it's behind some sort of, firewall. Can others access it? Or what do we have to do to access it? Or what do we do if they turn off access? We just don't have it anymore. And you can't compel them to give it, give open access to that type of stuff. That would be my concern.
Yeah, and I'll just add that some of the HBCUs that we have talked to early on are really, really excited and interested in sharing, ingesting, and protecting, just so that equity and inclusiveness is not just a theme, it's an actual practice.
And I will second that. Morgan State is very interested as well.
Hey.
The Center for Equitable Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning Systems is doing exactly that, working with Latimer, John Pasmore, to make that happen.
Awesome.
We are going to start the next session as close to 2:15 as we can. It may take us a few minutes to get set up, so please take your bathroom breaks, but come back quickly. And join me in thanking our speakers one more time.